Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Stacy. I think we all agree you should continue to say yes. That was excellent. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Kelly Corrigan. I first heard about Kelly and her book, The Middle Place, from friends in my neighborhood. And then I heard about it from friends in my mom's group. Then I saw a video on Facebook, and finally I thought, I guess I better read this book. So I think the word girl crush was developed to describe how people feel about Kelly. When you read The Middle Place, you fall in love with her and you fall in love with her family. We should all be so lucky to have someone like Kelly in our inner circle. She's funny, but she's not just funny. She's real, she's authentic, and you feel like you know her when you read her writing. You want her to be your friend. You want her to be the person who comes over to have a glass of wine when your kids are in bed. And so we're really excited to have her here. She followed up The Middle Place with another book called Lift, and her third is coming out next February called Glitter and Glue. And I just learned this morning she's working on a novel, so we have that to look forward to as well. So on behalf of MedTech Women, I'd like to thank you for being here, Kelly, and please help me give her a warm welcome.
The thing you need to know about me is that I am George Corrigan's daughter. He loves a cold beer and noon mass and this fedora he calls his Indiana Jones hat. He thinks nothing of going to the corner store in his pajamas and an overcoat, and he calls his bed a fart sack. He's on his 4th set of teeth, his 3rd round of cancer, and his 900th lacrosse game. And within minutes of meeting him, you will feel smarter and funnier than you have in years. And then there's my mom. She puts cracked ice in her Chardonnay, thinks $20 is about right for a prom dress, and orders the salmon. She believes in Barry Goldwater, the Catholic Church, regifting, shoulder pads, and showing up. Their job is to keep me from harm. I know this because I'm a parent now too. I know what it is to want to safeguard your children. It starts with the first prenatal vitamin, and it never ends. Swim lessons, fire drills, CPR, and still, the child you've been so careful to protect might call you and say, "You better sit down. Something's happened." And that's what this whole thing is about, calling home instinctively. Even when you have all the documents that prove you're an adult, a marriage license, 2 birth certificates, 7 years of tax returns, but there you are, clutching the phone and thanking God that you are still someone's daughter. Hi. I'm so scared to be here. You're all so smart and attractive and well-dressed. Except for you, Mike. I think it's so funny how nice we all look. You would think that maybe if we were all alone, we could take off our bras and our Spanx and sit here in pajamas. But look at these stupid heels I'm wearing. I mean, I'm in pain. I turned 46 a few weeks ago, which is old enough, as I'm sure you'll agree, to have been on all sides of the patient experience. I've been the daughter of a very sick man who you've just been introduced to. I have been the mother of a very small girl in the ER, and I have been the woman in the chemo chair and under the knife and exposed on the radiation table. Consequently, I have tremendous respect and appreciation for what you do and what you are trying to do. I had the best conversations last night. I talked to Becky about some crazy cluster headache treatment that she's working on. And then I talked to a woman named Judy from Chicago who is working on this giant Band-Aid that tracks your heartbeats. And I'm so grateful that people like you are doing this work. I'm quite sure that I wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for the people like you who came before, who developed the therapies and chemotherapies that I use to get better from breast cancer. So thanks. I also want to say that I think you're so wise to have a patient begin your day. And I think it must be so difficult, given what you do, to keep us in mind. I know myself that I have been reading stories about cancer for several years now, and sometimes the more you talk about something, the more abstract it becomes and the harder it is to actually feel it. And so I hope that what I can do for you today is make you feel it and make you remember the human beings on the other end of the things that you do, so that you might be able to do them better and longer and through the long, dry periods and periods of failure and periods where you think, you know what, maybe I'll just go home and take off my Spanx and call it a day on this whole thing. I do think, I don't often say it, but I'll say it today, I do think there is a moral component to how we choose to spend our time. And I think that there's a lot of brain power in this room today, and I just am so happy that you've chosen this work to apply all that talent and skill and gift towards. So good on you. Okay, so what I thought I'd do is sort of zero in on 3 different moments in my experience as a patient or my experience as the mother or daughter of a patient. And then we'll do a Q&A, and then I'll finish with a short reading just for women. So the first thing I'm going to read from is The Middle Place. The Middle Place really came about because I had this flawed assumption that life was linear. I thought that you had your childhood, and then you had some seminal event, like you got the corner office, or you had a baby, or you bought a house, and then you became forever and always a grown-up. And then I was in the bath one night with my girls. We don't bathe together anymore. They were very young. It was totally appropriate. And I brushed against something in my breast that turned out to be a 7-centimeter tumor, and I was in chemotherapy about 2 weeks later. And over the course of that fall, rather than having this very first crisis of my life, a blessed life, turned me into an adult overnight, it actually had the opposite effect, where I was sort of living like a child lives for the first time since I was 5. You know, people were doing my laundry for me and bringing me treats, and I was getting presents for no reason at all, which is the sure sign of childhood. As I just asked if I could please have 2 of the little white notebooks so I could have 1 for each of my daughters. But then on the heels of my final chemotherapy, my mom called and said, Kelly, honey, I don't know how to tell you this, but your father had some blood in his urine. He talked to Dave Ellis at a lacrosse game, and it turns out it's cancer. And I remember right where I was sitting, and I remember the little patch of wall I was looking at in my living room, and I remember thinking, this is the first adult moment of my life. Surely what defines adulthood is living in the world without the people who have made it a safe place for you. And so that's what the book is about for me in some ways. It chronicles this one year where both my father and I had cancer and were in and out of surgeries and chemotherapies. And then every other chapter is a flashback to childhood, partially for comic relief, and I had definitely had a comical childhood, and partially because I wanted to look at what it is to be someone's kid when you're a kid, and how that's different or not nearly as different as you thought it might be when you're, quote, all grown up. So I thought that I would dive into a moment in the cancer experience that many people seem to be curious about. How many cancer survivors are here today? Wow, you're healthy. What is the deal with that? How could that be? That just defies the numbers. I'm coming to this every year. I saw Coca-Cola on the bar. We have to talk. Are you surprised that I haven't lost my hair yet? I asked the oncologist. It doesn't happen right away. So it's going to come out, all of it? Oh, definitely. You will definitely lose all your hair, he confirms. everywhere. I double check. Everywhere. My eyelashes? Yes. My lady hair? Sorry, Mike. All of it. I know this, but some things you need to hear a few times before they sink in. My girls, if I'm bald, they'll be so wigged out. The doctor walks us over to Susan Mark's office. Susan is a psychologist. Because I want to impress her, a professional who might validate my mental health, I say, our biggest concern is how my baldness might affect our children. Susan says that until children turn 8, they can't help but insert themselves into everything. In the absence of something they can see or understand, they make things up. So in this case, my hair falling out is either their fault or it's going to happen to them next, or both. Maybe I went bald because Claire took the dust jackets off all the books in the office again. Or a shark, like the one in Finding Nemo, swam up the stairs and chewed off all my hair. They fabricate stories, Susan explains, because it's easier to share space with something fiendish but defined than something shapeless just there in the dark. I nod, remembering how much better it felt to be diagnosed than to be squinting into the glare of possibility, unable to see anything clearly, but sensing its enormity. So one evening in early September, my friend Sarah shaves my head out on the deck while the girls watch. Phoebe, Edward's little sister, is here memorializing the event with a 35 millimeter and helping to create an air of performance. Georgia makes little mustaches out of the hair around my feet. Edward puts a pile of dark brown locks on Claire's head. I drink several whiskey sours and enjoy feelings of liberation and bravery. I am doing it. But alone in the shower, rubbing tiny hairs off my neck and ears, staring at myself in Edward's shaving mirror suctioned to the wall, it's like an arrow has flown through an open window and hit me in the chest, and I can do nothing but hold the arrow and watch the blood dripping from me, over my belly, down my legs, onto the shower floor, pink and fast-moving in the rush of water, slowly appreciating that this bloodletting will kill me eventually, unless someone finds me there and saves me. Edward bounds in and opens the door and looks at me like he's a teenager seeing tits for the first time. I know you're going to think I'm blowing sunshine up your ass, but it looks really good. I start crying, almost heaving, and he goes on, really, I'm serious, you can do this because you have such a pretty face. I step out of the running shower to hug him and to be hugged and to wail. After a minute, I pull back and hold his shoulders like a dying matriarch who only has a few words left and must get through. I'm so proud of you, Edward. You're such a good husband, and that's such an important thing to be, and so many people aren't good at it, and you really are. You really are. This, like the day I was diagnosed, turns out to be a great day, a day to remember, a day when we lived up to ourselves and all our promises to each other. It takes several days for me to leave the house, days and a final decision about what to wear. Hat, turban, bandana, wig, ears tucked in, now out, now half in. I decide on this certain scarf as my best look, but my usual hoop earrings now bring to mind a fortune teller. So I switched to silver studs, I guess, for the rest of the year. My scarf is pink and white tie silk, the kind with little bumps and knots in it, and bits of blue run through the thin stripe pattern. I stand there taking myself in, reconciling it all. Do I dare drive Georgia to school? Might I even have the nerve to pick up her little friend? Am I a mother again? Hey, Lori, I say when my friend picks up the phone. You know, I think I'm ready to take my look on the road. I think I'll take the kids in today. She is impressed. I'm in my old Levi's and a white button-down of my dad's. I look in the mirror more times than I have in a week. My scarf is clinging nicely to itself, a little touch of lip color, much mascara, and I'm feeling strangely attractive. Georgia and Claire are in car seats, and I'm pulling into Lori's driveway right on time. Hey, you look beautiful, says Lori, whose mother happened to die of breast cancer when Lori was in college. Yeah, good. It's not bad, really, I say, stroking my head like a proud hairdresser. Emma, let's go. Kelly's here, Lori calls. Emma comes bouncing down the stairs in a Dora the Explorer t-shirt and jeans and says without any emotion, "You look like a monster." Then she glides past me into the den while I stand there speechless. Emma, Lori says, and then looks at me. She just saw the movie. Have you seen it, Monsters, Inc.? I haven't, but I think that's the one with the monster whose bald head looks like a giant eyeball. I think, I say, wishing I'd stayed at home where I felt good. Maybe this isn't a good idea. I mean, the other kids. Oh, Kelly, do you want me to take them? Yeah, here, I say, putting my keys in her hand. The girls are in the car. I'll be at home. I walk out the driveway, leaving the door open behind me. I tell my girls that Lori wants to drive today, so she's going to take them to school in our car, and won't that be extra fun? Let's go, Emma, right now. Lori's right behind me, so I turn and walk home, hoping no one I know drives by. I grab the phone on the way in the door and dial Edward. Kel? She called me a monster, I say, crying and falling into the sofa. Who did? Emma Lindgren. That bitch. I don't know what to say about a man who calls a perfectly adorable 3-year-old a bitch. But my hero comes to mind. So I think, as evidenced in that reading, that there's a lot to what's going on behind the scenes in a patient's life while you guys are in your offices trying to push your product up the hill and get it through all the hoops and making PowerPoint slides and spreadsheets. This is what we're doing on the other side of that. And I think to the extent that you can remember that, it will totally energize you to live long enough to fight another day, because I am sure, knowing all the friends I know who are in biotech, that it is a long, tough road with a lot of valleys. The other people that are behind your devices and gadgets, that's minimizing it, right? Gadgets is not right. Scratch. Your incredible machinery are the families of these patients. And when you are the mother of a patient, who here has been the mother of a patient? That is just the most intense feeling. I think it's much, much worse, in my opinion, than being the actual patient. So this second book, Lift, which is very short, and we have copies here for you if you want them, is really about risk in parenthood. And I was having this conversation with my college roommate's husband, who is a hang glider of all things. And I said to him, I just totally don't even get it. Like, is there seriously not a motor? And he said, no, there really isn't. And then I said, where do you go to how long are you up there? And he said, 5 or 6 hours. And I said, where do you go to the bathroom? And what do you eat? And he said, basically, you fly from thermal to thermal looking for lift. That's how it works. And I didn't really know what that meant, but I loved the way it sounded. And I sort of had this impulse to say, God, don't we all? And then he went on to explain that lift is this column of hot air that's inside turbulence. And that if you have the stomach to break through the turbulence, or the guidance because you're following another glider, once you get through the turbulence, the hot air will lift you, and it will put you at a different altitude, and you can see different things. And you have a different quality of flight. And I really came to believe that that's what this book was about for me, is that there is tremendous risk in parenthood, probably the greatest risk any of us take, the heart on the outside of the body, as they say. But it is a different quality of flight, and you do see things differently once you're up there. And if you can stomach all the turbulence, it can actually be quite pleasant sometimes. So, although I have teenagers now, so it's not pleasant anymore. This was written when they were young, and we still liked each other. They tell me she's coming back. I don't know. So I thought that I would read a short chapter. So when Claire, so we have these two girls, Georgia and Claire, and when Claire was 3 or 4 months old, she had a fever. And then my pediatrician, who is a really good friend of ours because I set her up with my friend and they got married, great person to do a solid. House calls forever. She came over to take a look, and she said she was checking for blanching. Do you know about this? So, she had this like little rash, and it looked like paprika kind of sprinkled around her diaper area. And it didn't blanch when she rubbed her thumb over it, which meant that it's not a rash at all, that it's a sign of infection. It's red blood cells. And so she sent me off to Children's Hospital. And when I pressed to understand what was going on, she said it's possible she has meningitis. And when I Googled meningitis, which is such a bad idea, it said untreated bacterial meningitis is almost always fatal. And so I took my baby to the Children's Hospital Oakland, to the ER. They got her in there. They gave her a spinal tap, which was one of the worst sounds I've ever heard, was the sound of her voice in that razory scream, taking that needle. And then they put her on IV antibiotics, and then you wait. You wait for 3 days for the spinal tap to reveal whether it's bacterial meningitis or viral meningitis, which is a cold. You probably know all this. You're probably so much smarter than me. You're probably bored. Okay. The first day in Children's, this is written as a letter to the girls. So when I say you, I mean Claire. The first day in Children's, you probably slept 12 hours. Every few hours, I tried to get you to take a bottle, but you didn't want it. Sister Bernice stopped by to ask if I had any questions about insurance, parking validation, anything at all. Something about a nun going room to room reminded me of old war movies. I started to say I just want her to wake up, but my voice was shaky, so I just shook my head no. I didn't want her to hug me or crack me wide open or do therapy on me. Well, if you need me, just ask the nurses to page me, all right, dear? I felt my face flush as I nodded, like I was back in 3rd grade with Mrs. Ford's necklace in my mouth. Dad came to sit. He had a report from home. Someone had invited us to a black tie party at a champagne lounge. We got a postcard from the dentist about an appointment next week. Georgia fought to wear her fleeced kitty cat jacket, even though it was 75 degrees. I wanted to break in with, how can you possibly care? But I decided not to. For all I knew, Dad was self-medicating with to-do lists and calendars. I didn't respond at all, which I knew was a rejection of sorts, a way of leaving him alone, but it was better than lashing out. Dr. Benjamin came by to check in and assure us that they were keeping an eye on the cultures. I asked him when you would get your appetite back. He said maybe the next day and reminded me that you were being hydrated through the IV, and that was the important thing. Early the next morning, while Dad was home with Georgia, I walked around the hospital. I found myself in the parents' lounge. There were pens and paper, a fax, a printer, and power strips, so multiple people could plug in while their kids had bone marrow transplants, or slept off chemo, or waited for their femurs to reset. I picked up a brochure about summer camp, archery, sailing, crafts, for kids with cancer. I read a poster about Beads of Courage, a program where kids get a new bead for every shot and pill and procedure until, I suppose, their necklaces drape on the ground. At that point, I had no beads of courage myself. Mono, chickenpox, tonsillitis, that's what I knew of shots in hospitals. It'd be another year before an oncology nurse settled me in for my first bag of chemotherapy. Next door was a play space for all the kids who couldn't go outside because they couldn't risk the everyday germs that the rest of us sneeze all over each other without concern or repercussion. The shelves were crowded with wooden puzzles, coloring books, stuffed animals, some costumes. A corn popper push-along was leaning against the wall near a rocking horse. If necessary, I gathered from the bouquet of withering balloons in the corner, kids could have their birthday parties here. And I had recently announced to Dad that we had to take you to Disneyland one year for a birthday treat. I wandered back to our room and slumped in the recliner. I was so tired. Things were kind of gauzy. An infection in your membrane. How thin is a membrane? I stretched a white sheet from my shoulders to my knees like I was on a cross-country red-eye, and then put my head back down. To lower bar, lift, then squat. That's what the plaque on your crib said. It seems so simple, but only the nurses were able to do it without a struggle. On day 3, you sucked a bottle dry. The sound of that milk being pulled through that nipple, I can hear it now. Right after Dad showed up, Dr. Benjamin strode in, beaming, and announced that the culture was in and you had viral meningitis, the good kind. Dad jumped up to shake his hand. We thanked Dr. Benjamin as a nurse came in to unhook you. I hovered as she unwrapped the splint, pulled the tape off your hand, slipped out the needle, and put on a tiny Band-Aid, all in a single motion. "She's all yours," the nurse said as I picked you up. The relief was physical, like cold water on a burn. I signed forms with my free hand and cleared out your things from the room and waited with you by the exit. You held my finger, and I rotated my attention from you to the driveway to the wall across from me. It was a mural, a landscape photograph that obeyed the rule of thirds, a principle of composition I'd learned in that one-night seminar at Elmwood Camera. The bottom third was the city of Oakland, the middle third was clouds, and the top third was blue sky. Someone, whoever was in charge of lobby decorations, I guess, had glued a small wire and mesh butterfly to the image above the clouds. Could something that small really survive at that altitude? Dad pulled up out front. He jumped to open the back door and kissed you before he snapped you into the car seat. I leaned in the other side to tuck a blanket around your chin so the straps wouldn't rub against you. We drove away into Berkeley, past the people walking with their coffee and cell phones, their shopping bags and strollers, their backpacks and school books and skateboards. But the smell of the hospital, the sting of those overhead lights in the night, the snippets of conversation I'd heard stayed with me and marked the beginning of how I came to know what a bold and dangerous thing parenthood is. Risk was not an event we'd survived, but the place where we now lived. I'm happy to have shared that with you, if only for one reason, which is that I remember all those people's names. I remember Sister Bernice. I remember Leo Benjamin, who was such a delightful pediatrician that I actually tried to set him up with my friend, and it didn't go well. But he was a damn good doctor. And I remember the people that I met in those hallways. I remember the technician. I remember the woman, the triage nurse who took us in the very beginning. And I think that there's a humanity that can happen around the space of crisis that's really can be the high point of our lives, I think, when all of that is exposed and everybody stops working and we're all just being. And so I hope that you get that experience as much as possible where you can really let your humanity shine. And I do think that, I must say, that women have a special capacity for empathy. And so I think it's thrilling that you're the people that are trying to solve these problems because maybe you're the only people that can solve these problems. The last little passage that I'm going to read is from the new book, which is called Glitter and Glue. And it's called Glitter and Glue because my mother, who doesn't come off especially well in the middle place, likes to remind her children that your father's the glitter, but I'm the glue. And I suspect there is some glue here today. But interestingly, you know, my mother is a gritty woman. She can get a lot done. She's a total go-to person in a crisis. She probably doesn't want to go to the cocktail party and would not want to make small talk over coffee out there. But if you have a problem, she's your girl. But interestingly, and she's been extremely healthy. But interestingly, she did have this one emergency situation, and I saw this other side of her. And so this short passage is about that. It may be that loving children radically and beyond reason expands our capacity to love others, particularly our own mothers. A couple years ago, my mom volunteered, here she might say agreed, to keep the girls for 5 days and nights so I could tag along with Edward on a work trip to London. We would fly from California to Philadelphia, spend a couple days settling the kids in at Wooded Lane, and then leave on the red-eye to Heathrow. I bought tickets to Billy Elliot and made dinner reservations online at some bistro I read about in the Times travel section. In preparation for our arrival, my mother was tidying up outside, pruning her impatience. She wanted the patio to look nice as we sipped Inglenook over ice. Do you even know what Inglenook is? You don't, do you? Comes in a jug about this big. Nice screw top. Costs about $7.99. While we sipped Inglenook over ice and ate stoned wheat thins with Swiss, while Greenie, which is what we call my dad, Greenie grilled burgers as big as softballs. While my mom was moving a wrought iron serving tray on wheels, a rock she didn't see pushed the tray back into her shin, breaking the skin. She went upstairs to the tub to rinse out the cut, topping it with Neosporin, a favorite product of hers, and a large Band-Aid. The morning of our arrival, a red ring had spread out from her cut, probably 3 or 4 inches in diameter. This worried exactly no one, least of all her. "When you get old, everything takes twice as long to heal," she said. We hung around the house that afternoon, the girls making lists of activities they wanted to do during the week. The pigeons came by. That's her girlfriends. The pigeons came by one... It's kind of a self-effacing twist on hens. The pigeons came by one to visit. Clara shared her newest set of riddles, and Georgia told them about her lacrosse coaches, while the ladies snapped photos with their bad cameras and passed on clothes their granddaughters had outgrown. After dinner, my mom took the girls up to the tub, squirting baby shampoo into the rush of water to make bubbles. Even though I was still there, my mother was in charge. After baths, she gave them each a 2-minute back rub with the Flex-targeted massager I bought years ago for her birthday in a panic at an airport Brookstone. All their bodily tensions released, the girls knelt by my mom's bed to say the Our Father and the Hail Mary. If that went well, my mom allowed them 15 minutes of a television program. Around 7 p.m., Mary Ann popped by. After she hugged the girls and said how big and beautiful they looked, she caught sight of my mom's leg and gasped, "Mary, that's infected." The ring was twice as big as it had been in the morning, and the swelling ran the length of her shin. "You need to take her to the hospital," Mary Ann said to me, making me blush, ashamed that my mom's friend seemed more engaged in my mother's well-being than I was. Within the hour, my mom had been seen by a general practitioner and sent from the ER to the 3rd floor, where they started IV antibiotics. An infection had entered her bloodstream. The next morning, Edward went to the airport without me. My mom's behavior in the hospital astonished me. The way a seasoned newscaster, usually stern and unflappable, can shock you with a show of emotion. She begged me to make them stop all the poking. Just getting the needle into her vein made her weep. Look at the bruises." There was a nurse she thought wasn't listening to her. The original doctor, who she liked, had not come by again, and she wanted to make sure her case had not been transferred. A new doctor, who did not shake her hand or look her in the eye, said that if they were unable to get control of the infection, they would have to at least consider amputation. I could see and damn near feel the terror coursing through her. I stood close to her and agreed with everything she said. Those nurses are rough. That bruising is crazy. This food could not be more disgusting. Whatever she felt, I felt with her. I did not try to dissuade her. I had learned that from my own pigeon, Betsy. It's our job to be on their side, she told me, referring to both our children and our parents. I sat by her side, making lists of things to bring from home, her special sleep shirt, a toothbrush, some underwear, the newspaper, a pencil for the crossword, her reading glasses. When she got emotional, my father assured her with uninformed optimism that everything would be fine, while I asked the doctors hard questions and took notes. Our roles were set. My dad made the staff like us. I made the staff answer us. With my mom's powers disabled, I was the glue to his glitter. When my mom slept, I flipped through the magazines I'd brought for her and followed the ticker tape news along the bottom of the muted TV and looked at her. She seemed old in the hospital bed, older than I was ready for, at risk. Her skin was thin, her cheeks and neck creped. Family life wore her down. The daily mashup of tiny, stupid tasks, like roasting chickens and finding the other sneaker, crossed with monitoring rivalries and developing emotional circuitry and soothing when possible, all the while allowing some pockets of time to feel your own feelings and pursue your own pursuits. It's a lot to maneuver. But what compressed her into an old woman? What made her bones heavy and her joints stiff? What used her up? Wasn't the labor. It was the bottomless worrying and wanting and hoping. Even now, I realize there's so much I'd like to know about this woman. What was she doing in the picture from the shore in the maid's uniform with the pot on her head? What does she say to God when she prays? Why did she fall in love with my dad? Was it because of his loud, jolly bigness or despite it? or because there's some soft, quiet side of him I do not know. Did she end up telling him about my shoplifting? Later that night, that year, ever? Why wasn't I allowed to have a blow dryer? There's more things I need to know. What do you do when your kids play off each other? How do you stand their fits of hatred, the stomping and screaming and slamming? How do you let people talk about you, judge you, call you a witch? How do you know when to step in and when to recede? What am I doing wrong? What does she need to know from me? Not much. Maybe she'd like to hear, much to my own surprise, not to mention Edward's, that I've ended up siding with her on many matters, especially matters involving parenting, or I should say, mothering. There are no free-for-alls in my house. I'll hold back dessert, new jeans, a sleepover, anything at all, really, until I get whatever deliverable is due. I'm not the kind of mother who lives a tourist life in her own town, combing through the paper for festivals and nature walks and community potlucks. We can all breathe on that one, right? I have never worked all week on a homemade Halloween costume, nor do I buy the girls' dresses that require dry cleaning. A big treat is going to the secondhand clothing store and picking through the racks to see how much crap we can get for $20. I insist on seatbelts and bike helmets even in the driveway. I tell my girls to be careful every time they leave the house, and I can't watch them climb a tree or walk through a parking lot without ripping off whatever bit of fingernail I can get between my teeth. Many times the high point of my day is after the house has been mucked up and I can take off my bra, pour some wine over ice, have a few nuts, and flip through the mail while my girls do their homework. I don't give them false praise or cheap feedback, and the thought of my girls being rejected makes me more angry than sad. I read the notes I find in their pant pockets and the journals tucked in their dresser drawers. I fret over things long after Edward clicks off his reading light and goes to sleep. Croup, melanoma, insecurity, precocious puberty. Raising people is not some lark. It's serious work with serious repercussions. It's air traffic control. You can't step out for a minute. You can barely pause to scratch your ankle. Let us pause for a little queuing and A-ing, and to incentivize, you would know that word, incentivize, is that right? Never seems right to me. We have 5 copies of The Middle Place, so if you ask one of the first 5 questions, maybe there'll only be 5, you get a free copy. Who wants a book?
And we have microphones as well for anybody who would like to.
Yeah.
Just a simple one, but how did your mother's outcome come out?
She was in there for 5 days, and they finally beat the infection. And when she was finished, she said, "Oh, for God's sake, Kelly, go home. I'm not dying." And I was like, "I guess you're better. I guess we're back to normal now." Yeah. Yeah.
So when you were going through your cancer treatment,
Yeah.
were there times when the doctors or medical community kind of, push you to do certain things or make certain medical choices, and you said no, or did you have situations where you disagree with the doctor? How did you deal with that?
You know, it's really funny. I felt like I was on both sides of that at one point or another. So the first thing that happened was actually the exact opposite of that, where I felt like they weren't, that they were being too accommodating. So, one day you're a housewife with 2 kids, and the next day you're a breast cancer patient, and they're actually deferring to you, at least conversationally, in those early meetings, and saying, talking about breast preservation and what my preferences might be. And I did feel like screaming at one point, and maybe I even did, that I don't care what my preference is to live a really long life. And I don't know anything about this. There's no breast cancer in my family. I've never given it a moment's consideration. I'm 36 years old. I want you to tell me exactly what to do. I'm strong as an ox, so give me everything. But please don't ask me what my preference is. I mean, that felt like an outrageous suggestion that maybe they would factor in my desires when I don't have enough information to make that decision or to choose between options. As I said, I was 24 hours into it, and there was this idea that maybe I would collaborate in the treatment defining the treatment, and that just seems silly to me. Although sometimes I'm a person who doesn't even think we should be allowed to vote on things because I don't know enough to vote sometimes. Like on the last ballot when you had to say how much space a chicken should have, how many square... I just felt like maybe we shouldn't be voting on that. So then on the flip side, I did my chemotherapy first. So I had some possible lymph node involvement. And as I said, it was a very large tumor. And it was aggressive. It was HER2 new, which now is a good thing, although it only became a good thing shortly after I was diagnosed, thanks to Herceptin, which treats that type of tumor so well. So anyway, I went in there, and John Park, who's the oncologist at UCSF, who's a wonderful guy, said, we're going to put you on chemotherapy you'll go for a whole day every 3 weeks, and we're going to do that 8 times. And then after that, we'll give you a chance to recover, and then you'll do surgery, and then we'll give you a chance to recover from that, and then you'll do radiation. And then after that, I did a whole another year of chemotherapy, and then I had another surgery on my ovaries, etc. But the moment of truth was he said, you're going to do it every 3 weeks. So I happened to have this friend, Tori Birch, who you know probably from Close, and she was on the board of Sloan Kettering, and she's a Philly girl, and I'm a Philly girl. And she contacted my mom and said, I just want you to know that I'm on the board of Sloan, and if Kelly wants to talk to anybody there, just call me. So I called her and said, here's what they're telling me, and this is what I think they want me to do. And she said, why don't you talk to Larry Norton? He is kind of perceived to be the total guru of breast cancer nationwide. So I said, sure, I'll talk to anybody. So I get on the phone with Larry Norton, who's on vacation, and he says, how old are you again? And I said, 36. And he said, I would do your chemotherapy every 2 weeks. I don't know why we're going to wait a 3rd week to let that cancer fight back. I just want to clobber it. And we have been doing, it's called dose dense. We've been doing it this way at Sloan, occasionally with younger patients who we feel like are going to be able to withstand chemotherapy fairly well. So I go back to John Park, hang up, I talk to my husband, we go back to John Park, and I say, have you ever considered doing it dose dense? And he says, no, that's not our protocol. And this is a guy who goes by the protocol, which is a very comforting thing in a doctor, most of the time. And I said, okay, and he said, what put that idea in your head? And I knew, right? Because all doctors have egos, right? And I'm about to invoke like the Woody Allen of breast cancer. So I said, well, through a very strange set of circumstances, I happened to be on the phone with Larry Norton. And he said, you were on the phone with Larry Norton? I can't explain it. It's too embarrassing. And so anyway, it came to pass that I was the first patient at UCSF to go dose dense, and it's now their protocol. And yeah. So I think that can cut both ways, and perhaps it's just a matter of timing. And when it's a very tall order, right, to take care of somebody who is a new breast cancer patient. I mean, 1 minute we're confident, the next minute we're timid, the next minute we want to be involved, the next minute we want to be told exactly what to do like we're 4 years old. So I empathize with the doctors that have to deal with us. But maybe there's kind of a time frame there where initially you want a lot of hand-holding and to be told that you want to get the impression, like sometimes children do with parents, that I know exactly what to do. And I don't think sometimes my children want to be exposed to the fact that I'm not really sure what's going on. And then as they get older, they're more comfortable with the ambiguity. And maybe as a patient, they're more comfortable having those types of conversations. Well, I guess everybody wants a book now. Now that you know I know Larry Norton.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, was there a medical department in your experience where you said, gosh, if I could change this one experience, I would magic wand.
The doctor, so I went in for, it's like a drive-up mammography center. You don't go to a hospital, which is nice. And there's plenty of parking, which is also, those little things make a big difference. They had valet parking at my radiation center. That was incredible. At any rate, the very first, my friend gave me a breast exam. She's an OB-GYN. Sometimes my friends and I give each other breast exams. I'm sure you guys do too. She's an OB-GYN. She's that in the bath thing. I feel like I'm sunk now. So she said, you should go for a biopsy tomorrow. And so I went to this place in Berkeley, a drive-up place, as I said, and the guy, they took the pictures, a mammogram, first mammogram of my life, sat down, and then they said, come on, the sweet, sweet nurse said, come on back, let's do it one more time. The doctor wants to see a couple more pictures. At which point, my mouth goes dry, and things get fuzzy, and I know that something's happening. And then she says, come on back, the doctor would like to talk to you, right? And then I'm just can barely feel my body around me anymore. And I sit down, and he says, I'm very concerned. And I said, why? And he said, it's quite large. And in fact, it looks like an explosion. So if I could change one moment in the whole story, it would be that he would have found a different word. But again, I empathize with the doctors and the nurses and with all of you, because it does get very abstract. I mean, this is a guy who's seeing me over and over and over again for probably 30 or 40 years. I mean, he was an old guy. And so he can't remember that this is real for me, that my life is changing right in front of his eyes, and that the things he's saying to me I'll never forget. And that's kind of intense. That's a lot of responsibility for just one little old guy. So I feel it, and I do think that it's a real call to action for all of us to try to bring our humanity with us to every conversation and every meeting and every brainstorming session, so that we might be less distanced from the reality that people's lives are in the balance here.
So way over here. Hey, to your right.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I don't know my right from left.
Yeah. Well, okay.
I really don't.
So thank you very much for sharing. And I've actually been on the other side of that. I'm a general surgeon. I've taken care of a lot of breast patients. My youngest was 26 with no family history, which is really frightening. I think many of the people in this room are in device related rather than necessarily chemotherapy,
the so-called
radiation.
Gadgets.
Yeah, so the gadget stuff. And I'm curious, do you think, can you envision a gadget that would have made either your father's, your child's, your experience different?
What a great question. I'll tell you a gadget that I'd love to see somebody improve, which is the port. Do you guys know what, it's, so, I went into chemotherapy first, and they were going to put a port in so that they didn't have to go through a vein every time. And that was fine, and it sounded okay. I mean, it's not like the greatest name. I think I could probably think of a better one, but it kind of depersonalizes you a little teeny bit. It turned out that the only slot that I could get into surgery, because you have to have this very small surgery to have it put in, was like at 9 o'clock, and I had already eaten, and so I couldn't take a general anesthetic. They just gave me a local. And so this surgery is happening right here, and this is awfully close to my face, and so I'm awake. I can't feel it, but I mean I'm like seeing things, and for some reason that day somebody forgot to tell me that I was going to have like essentially a Frankenstein bolt in my chest when this thing was over, and they just forgot to show me a picture or prepare me in any way for what that was going to be like. And you can actually see. Once they put it in, you can see the line going through. That's they started here, and then it runs down to the Frankenstein bolt. So I guess I would wish for two things. If you have to do the Frankenstein bolt, it'd be great if it wasn't somewhere so noticeable, and it would be lovely to have known that was going to happen in advance, because I can tell you that when I took off the bandages, I really thought something had gone terribly wrong, and that it was swelling. And then two is, it would be so wonderful if it could just be flat. Yeah.
I thought you'd say the spinal tap for your daughter.
Yeah, so it is a sickening thing to. Those words are rough words, even though I loved the movie. But, and she was so small, but this man, his name was Jeff, I remember him too, was kind of like standing like a naval cadet at the door. And Dr. Benjamin said, "This is Jeff," and he rounds out the babies during the spinal tap. And he was so competent and sure-handed, and he just took her hands and took her feet and just pulled her around so that her spinal cord was as open as it could be. And there was something about the way he moved and the way that he handled the situation that I just think I would have fallen over otherwise. And it was fairly fast. I mean, it's so awful, but it was with less than a minute, I'm sure.
But just a quick follow-on.
Yeah.
Your daughter, you spoke of the terrifying looking on the internet. You didn't. You spoke with Larry Norton.
Yeah.
For yourself. What happened with your relationship with the internet when at age 36 you were diagnosed?
Oh, the internet is such a dangerous place in so many ways. I mean, really, I could give a whole talk about that subject. I don't know how to control it. I'm not sure there's anything that anybody can do that can stop a crazed mother from digging around on the internet until she finds something that validates that crazy feeling. I mean, it's almost like you want to find the bad news because you can feel it, that this is serious and anything could happen, and your very logical, rational husband is staring at you saying you're overreacting, and then you're trying to prove that you're not overreacting, and it's right there, fatal. So, hell hath no fury like a woman. So yeah, it's a bad place. I mean, I guess the only thing you could do to mitigate against that burning desire to bottom out almost, to see what the worst case scenario is, would be to have great, highly publicized sites that people learn to go to. So I've learned, to go to mayoclinic.com, and I go to breastcancer.org, and I send people there. And so I guess if we were to create those master sites that really are responsible and careful, and then publicize the hell out of them so that they're top of mind in that moment when you first sit down alone, tasting the metal in your mouth, that you would actually remember to go to mayoclinic.com instead of just Googling, "Am I going to die?" Yeah.
Okay, I think this is our last question.
Throughout either your care, your father's, or your daughter's, can you talk about any issues you faced with being able to pay for all of this, and maybe?
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask about the challenge of cost. I know chemotherapy isn't cheap, and maybe your experience or some of the people you met along the way, and how we can do a better job there.
It's kind of an incredible thing. I know other people talk about it when someone close to them dies, and that all they want to do is crawl up in a ball, and then somebody's saying you need 12 copies of their death certificate. Like the fact that daily life keeps poking you even while you're in the crisis of your life is kind of this incredible incongruous moment. It's like cognitive dissonance almost. So one thing I thought maybe 150 times during those 2 years that I was in treatment was, thank God that I have a smart husband. And what do people do who are not smart enough or determined enough or confident enough to manage the system? Like, my heart goes out to them. We would get bills that, it's just like a little fluke. Who knows what it was, but it's $41,000 for something. And I think, oh God, is there somebody that's like now throwing a neighborhood fundraiser because they think they have to pay this? Like, this is a mistake. And Edward's smart enough to know that it's a mistake, and he's confident enough to know that he's going to call and call again and call again. And just the way he's able to express himself and being an articulate person, being a man perhaps, he's going to talk him down, and we're going to get this sorted out. But there are people that wouldn't be able to do that. They either wouldn't believe that they were right, or they'd give up after the first call or the seventh call, or the person on the other end of the line would talk them down. And then they would be there throwing like the little fun run to raise $41,000 to pay an errant bill. So it's just insane that could happen to a person while they're also fighting for their life. There was one other thing I wanted to say about paying, but I can't remember what it is because I'm 46 now. So who knows? I really can't remember. I'm so sorry. But it is, we felt, this is it. Thank you. When I first got diagnosed, I heard two women's doctors' names over and over again, Lisa Bailey in the East Bay, which is where I live, and Laura Esterman at UCSF. And it's much easier, and these two kids were in diapers. And so it would have been much easier for me to do my treatment in the East Bay. And I met with Lisa Bailey, and I loved her, and I loved the space, and it was about 7 minutes from my house. And at the end of the meet, and I'm feeling it, like the whole time I'm thinking, this is it, you're gonna be my person. We're gonna go meet with this other Esterman woman just to be thorough, but this is it, your home base. And at the end she said, she had referred to all these other things, that you need an oncologist and a radiologist, and I said, so are they all here? And she said, no, for insurance purposes, we're all separate. So you'll have to call your insurance company and see if they cover me, and then also Lorraine Champion, who will be your radiologist, who's the one I like, and then this certain oncologist who I also like. So you just got to check to see if they're on your plan. So all of a sudden I'm starting to feel like the shoe drop, like this seems like it's all going to be a big roll of the dice and a lot to manage. Then we drive over the bridge, and we go to UCSF, and Laura Esterman says, this is John Park, my colleague. He'll be your oncologist. Here's Susie Eder. She's your oncology nurse. Here's Catherine Mitsuka. She's going to be your chemotherapy nurse. She's going to actually put the line in for you. Here's where you're going to do your radiation. And it's all, once you give us your insurance card, you're done. So guess who I picked? So I don't know that Lisa Bailey and that East Bay team would have been any better. I feel like I got excellent care, but it would have saved me hours and hours and hours, because it often took, you have to get into the chemo chair at 9, so you're in morning traffic. That's an hour, and then you got to come an hour home, and then you have to pay this enormous sum in parking, which was really like, I just kept feeling like I wanted to take off my hat and be like, really? Like, you don't have like a bald discount? So it certainly played a huge role in how we chose UCSF over the East Bay team. Yeah?
I just want to make a quick comment. I happen to be in the ultrasound industry, but that's not why I'm saying this. I just want to share something that we ended up promoting or informing people within our organization about mammograms. So even when you do mammo, it's not the ultrasound mammo, but when you do a mammo, and if you happen to have dense breasts, you're not going to be able to see some of the lesions. So I would strongly recommend that you also request your doctor to go to an ultrasound or a sort of mammo, because if you have a dense breast, you would end up missing out on the mammo, what the X-ray can do. So just as an informational note, since we're all women over here, I want to make sure that each one of you, as you are taking care of your personal health, that you have this piece of knowledge, because the doctor won't necessarily push towards it. And there's a lady called Hello, who's a cancer survivor, and she had dense breast, and we were able to get it exposed dense or more. But she actually is going from state to state to make this legal requirement that the doctors that do mammography also recommend the ultrasound if it lands a big dense.
Well, I mean, if this is nothing else, this is a room of dense breasts. Right? I mean, I can tell from here.
Thank you, Kelly. I think that's all the questions we can take. And Kelly has one brief reading.
I have
and
one
then we'll
final.
Wrap it up.
So I wrote this about my mother and her friends, but it should hopefully take you to the core of everything. I had one of those milestone birthdays a few months back. After the party got going, I tried to make a toast. Something about friendship, something about my mother and her friends who call themselves the Pigeons. But it was rowdy, and my friend Shannon was heckling me, so I kept it short. Anyway, this is what I wanted to say. There were once a dozen pigeons, but in the past few years they lost two of the greats, Robin Birch and Mary Maroney, to cancer. On the pigeons go, though, like women do, limping one minute, carrying someone the next. They started in the 60s in suburban Philadelphia with bridge and tennis and Chardonnay. Okay, vodka. And over time became something like a dedicated fleet, armed ships sailing together, weather be damned. For me and women of my generation, it started with playdates, cutting carbs, and meeting on Monday mornings in workout clothes to do awkward moves with large, colorful balls. And I can see exactly where it's heading. We'll confer about jog bras and contractors and pediatricians. We'll gossip about babysitters, teachers, in-laws. We'll speculate about who had a shot of Botox, who cheats on their taxes, who cleans until midnight. We'll celebrate each other's achievements, opening an exercise studio, a corner store, a jewelry business. We'll celebrate our kids' achievements, making the traveling team, singing in the choir, learning to knit or speak French or play the flute. We'll borrow eggs, earrings, extra chairs. We'll throw birthday parties for each other and stain the rugs and shatter the wine glasses and mark up new counters with the odd slice of lemon. We'll worry about who seems down, who looks tired, who's drinking more and more. We'll say things we wish we hadn't and have to find a way to regain each other's trust. Things will break. They always do. Many will be fixed. We'll fret over our children, too shy, too angry, too needy. We'll brainstorm ways to help them become more resilient, patient, lighthearted. We'll protect them fiercely, pulling little bodies from the deep end, double-latching windows, withholding car keys. We'll bury our mothers and our fathers, shuttling our children off for sleepovers, jumping on red eyes, telling each other stories that hurt to hear about gasping, agonal breaths, hospice nurses, scars and bruises and scabs and house skin papers shortly after a person passes. We will nod in agreement that it is as much an honor to witness a person leave this world as it is to watch a person come into it. We'll admire each other for a fine creme brulee, a promotion, a finished marathon. We'll commiserate about commutes, layoffs, mortgage rates, Miley Cyrus. We'll confide in each other about feeling anxious or angry or uninteresting, or how many pieces of Halloween candy we accidentally ate from our kids' bags. We'll confess that we text while driving, or that we should be having more sex, or that we yell at our kids every day. We'll admit that we believe in God, Jesus Christ, heaven and hell, or that we don't. People will drift in and out. Book clubs will swell and thin. We'll write someone off and they'll reemerge later, and we'll remember both why we loved them and why we let them slip away. But we'll be softer and we'll want them back. We'll give up things together: caffeine, Tylenol PM, catalogs, social smoking. We'll take up things too: morning walks, hybrids, organic dairy, saying grace. We'll persuade each other to bake, sell, fold, stuff, paint, and write checks for our favorite nonprofits. We'll diagnose each other's brown lawns, torn muscles, and basement odors. We'll check each other's heads for lice and examine new bumps and moles and listen to a list of symptoms. We'll teach each other how to set a ringtone, make a slideshow, download a movie. We will call and say, "I heard the news," and whatever the news is, we will come running, probably with food. We'll insist on second opinions, lots of rest, and the best surgeon. We will face diseases, many kinds, and will temporarily lose our hair and our figures and our minds. Eventually, someone who is not supposed to die will. Maybe one of us, maybe a husband, God forbid a child. And all this celebrating and sharing and confessing will make certain essential comforts possible. We'll rally around and hold each other up, and it won't be nearly enough, but it will help the time pass just a hair faster than it would have otherwise. We will wait patiently and lovingly for that first laugh after the loss. When it comes, and it will come, we will cry as we howl, as we clutch, as we circle. We will transcend, ladies, because we did all this. In that worst moment, we will transcend. Thank you so much.